Welcome to Spiritual AF Sundays, a podcast where we mix culture, commentary, and the craft. I'm your host, Jess Karels, also known as the Mystic Geek, and I'll be diving into discussions about current events and trends from a Xennial occult nerd perspective. Social media rarely does these topics justice, so let's approach them with a more nuanced take. It's time to grab your favorite beverage, sit in a comfy chair, and get ready to peel back the layers of reality, because that is Spiritual AF. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Spiritual AF Sundays. This is Jess, the Mystic Geek. I'm recording this on Saturday, January 25th, at the eve of when I'm publishing this because A, timely, and B, procrastinator. I will fully own that. So our topic for today is what the Bible has to say about the sin of empathy. As most of you are likely aware at this point, Trump is now president of the United States. The inauguration has happened, and we are starting to see more and more about this tension that's occurring. Right after the inauguration, there was the sermon by Bishop Marian Edgar Buddy, where she called upon Trump to show mercy, which is a core component of the Christian faith. And what we have been seeing afterwards is this interesting backlash, not just by clergy, but also by members of our own government. For those who may not even be aware, there is currently a House of Representatives resolution that has been proposed to condemn her message. So we are at that point. And we are starting to see this concept of the sin of empathy or toxic empathy are being bandied about. And these are not new terms. These have been going on around ever since evangelical Christianity has become mainstream. We'll talk a little bit more about what those terms mean in a moment. Just wanted to give some background. So before jumping too far in the weeds here, I think some introductions are in order. My conversation on Threads, the social media site, has been any indication, I'm going to have a whole bunch of new people listening to this. So might as well introduce myself formally. My name is Jess. I also go by the Mystic Geek, and I am a pagan. I believe in folk traditions. I believe in the interconnectivity of humanity with itself, with nature, and with the divine. I believe that the deity out there, people are going to experience it differently. It's not a matter of being 100% correct on what is deity like. The important aspect is, how do we live our lives in connection with one another, with nature, and with divinity, which we will know mostly through our own experiences, but also through collective experiences with others. I am also an initiate of the Blue Star Wicca tradition. What that means is I have certain beliefs that are basically part of my religion. And what's interesting on Wicca is people can believe and honor and serve the deities within that religion while also being open to having connections and relationships with deities and other spirits outside of that. And you'll hear a lot about that if you do actually have conversations with fellow pagans, witches, Wiccans, whatnot. Our ability to work with deity and to seemingly manage paradox is rather fun, but it allows us to navigate uncertainty and figure out our own truths. So why am I doing this? Why am I, a pagan, going to have some conversations about the Bible? I feel that we are at an important time in American history when it comes to our national identity. Thanks to the increased access to information, I think a lot of us are aware we are at this crossroads point when it comes to the concept of America. We have these two identities that we are wrestling with, and one of them is going to take over. Kind of like that whole two wolves metaphor. It's the one that we feed, and we'll touch upon that in a moment. So let's talk about a couple of things first. Since I like to wander, I'm going to first talk about, well, what is sin? Since that seems to be the big thing people are freaking out about. Also, let's talk about just a very high level history of Christianity, how it got from where it started to the American form. And then we'll talk about that dual identity or that identity crisis that we're dealing with. So prior to this, I did some research online on the concept of the word sin that is used in the Bible. So when we're dealing with Christianity or any religion out there, unless you have a direct line of this is what people believed and it was passed down meticulously, we got to go with what the language says. So what is the Bible's perspective of sin? I'm going to link in the show notes the link to a video in BibleProject.com that actually talks about the Hebrew and the Greek word for sin. So in Hebrew, it's hata, and in Greek, the word that was used for sin in the Bible is hamartia. So what does this word mean? This word, plain and simple, means to fail or miss the goal. What goals are we talking about? If you look at the Old Testament, there from Genesis onward, we are all created in the image of God. So for us to fail in our mission is to deny our own divinity, our own sanctity, our own connection with deity, and also to fail to recognize that in other people. I believe that if you take a look at the 10 Commandments, half of them are about you being in right relationship with God, and half of them are about you being in right relationship with fellow humans on this planet. So things that evoke selfishness and especially acting in our own benefit at the expense of other people's, that is what would fall into that category of missing the mark of hakta or hamartia. So when we're dealing with Christianity in America, you got to think about this from a historical context within Christianity. It started off as the followers of Jesus, then becoming more of this martyrdom cult where they no longer had a fear of death because they felt that, well, once we die or once this world ends, we're going to be into whatever this next stage is. And in the Bible, so were some times where like, yeah, don't even bother marrying or having kids because the kingdom is about to come here. So there was a lot of confusion about that in the early Christian times. Then Christianity got co-opted and adopted and legalized by the Romans. So then we have this Holy Roman Empire that developed. And during that time, the Bible was used partly as it almost like it became two separate things. You had the Christianity of the folk people, of the lay people, the commoners, where it was about doing the right thing, being Christ-like, taking care of others. And then you have the Christianity of the aristocracy, the Christianity of power. And that is the doctrine of saying, well, the Bible says it's okay for me to do XYZ thing that harms other people or other groups of people because I have the power to do so. So that becomes the theology of domination or a vertical or hierarchical theology versus the theology of the commoner, which was more of a horizontal. So you're seeing power dynamics also taking part in this. So we have the Holy Roman Empire version of it. It goes into the Catholic Church. We have the Reformation where it splits off and is trying to bring it back to the concept of Christianity for the common people. And then we have some of our fundamentalists or extremists decide they're going to go off to the United States. And throughout all this time, we start developing what this pseudo-theology of manifest destiny and American exceptionalism. So these are beliefs that the United States is uniquely blessed as a country, and that it is our divine right to not only conquer the lands here in North America, but also to be in a position of ruling the world as a whole, as a superpower. In order for this to work, in order for us to be quote unquote uniquely blessed, you need to have some force out there that you claim is blessing you. And that is where we start going into this subset, this secta of Christianity that we see now manifest in the evangelical and the far right movements. So without that divine ordainment, quote unquote, then the concept of manifest destiny falls apart. If the concept of manifest destiny falls apart, there goes the justification that the people who settled the United States had for driving away indigenous people, for killing them, for taking away their land, restricting them from their own customs. That there goes away the justification of taking people from Africa, from their own homeland, stripping them of their cultural identity, turning them into slaves, and then treating them as subhuman in the years onward. One thing to think about in all this, the first African American child, the first Black child to be allowed into an integrated school, she's still alive. This is still relatively new that we're in the process of repairing the damage done by some of these beliefs that are caused by white supremacy, by imperialism, by a culture of exploitation, a culture of domination by a select few. We are still repairing from that. And that is leading to some identity challenges within America. If manifest destiny, the belief that we are ordained or blessed by God to do all the things that we've done, even if it's hurt other people, and American exceptionalism are that we are unique in our being blessed and have a special role. If we take those away, then what is America? What does America become? We have two different paths that we can take. There's always a middle ground, but I feel like where we're going to fall is between one of two different polarities. There is the continued view of America, the empire of separateness, recognizing that, yes, we have stolen land, stolen people, but the attempts to justify it through this quote unquote God-given role, the need to have separateness, the need to put people into distinct boxes for compliance, the use of light versus dark language, which feeds into colorism, and it also feeds into white supremacy, the enforcement of gender roles that man dominates woman, which then requires for those of us who refuse those roles or decide to change ourselves outright are seen as an anathema and a danger because we undermine this structure that's needed for this empire to continue. So that's one half of the path. If we look at the other path, it's us reckoning with our collective past and our current identity. It's seeing America as a country of immigrants on stolen land, also built by people stolen from their own homelands, learning how to work together and make sense of all of this. I don't think that America itself is going to fall apart, but I do feel like we are at the point of a revolution and a rebirth. My reason for having these conversations rather than brushing people off with their various beliefs is I personally believe that we as human beings are all aspects of the divine, and many of us fall short due to indoctrination. We did not consciously choose to be born into this place, this time, this upbringing. There are those who believe that our soul might have picked this, but me, Jess, if given the option, would not have picked this sim scenario, if you know what I mean. I'm willing to give other people grace when it comes to their background that led them to believe what they believe now. What they do with this information is on them. I also believe that there are many Christians who are not familiar with the Bible and hope that this at least opens up a curiosity for them to be able to learn and embrace the teachings from the Christian religion and from the Bible and integrate that into their lives. I also know there are a lot of people who left Christianity because of the spiritual abuse of various sects within Christianity. And I feel that for part of healing, for those who choose it, being open to actually reading the Bible versus completely having your experience colored by those who hurt you, I feel that might be a start for your own healing path. Right now, to get into the Bible talk, I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to throw a whole bunch of Bible verses at you to quote unquote justify the existence of LGBTQIA people and everyone else who is currently being oppressed under the new regime. I do not believe in a church-run government. So what the Bible says should not affect government policy. We're just going to flat out put that there. What this is about is showing Christians that you all have a Cain and Abel situation. We have those two brothers, Cain and Abel. They both offer up things to God. Cain, who does farming and agriculture, offers up vegetables. Abel, who is a shepherd, offers up a blood sacrifice, a sacrifice of animals. And God showed favor to Abel over Cain. Cain is a little pissed by this. So Cain goes to God and is like, God, what the heck? And God went and told him, if you are upset that your offering was not received, think about why. And so Cain's response to that is to kill Abel. So instead of looking inward and accepting his shortcomings, he lashed out at the one who got the favor. So let's take a look at this from a prosperity gospel mindset, which is part of the whole manifest destiny, American exceptionalism, God bless sort of thing. It is a very big binary. If you are blessed by God, you get abundance, you get power, you get authority. If you are not blessed by God, you are not. So let's take a look at the last 100 or so years, because it has only been that long. We have seen the increase in civil human rights for those who are not cis white men. We've seen the abolition of slavery. We have seen women receiving the right to vote. We have seen equity, where this game of Monopoly that is America, where a couple of people have been playing the game for an extended period of time and basically bought the stuff out, giving other people the chance to finally get at this table that we call the American dream. So we have all of these different things. And if you're a believer in this, if you're God blessed, you get stuff. And if you're not, you don't. And you're seeing these people that you consider your lessers basically being blessed and getting the rights that you had taken away from them and that you had restricted from them, that all of a sudden the systems are allowing them to have those things, where you're looking at God and going, what the heck? I thought that I was the special one. Why is it that you are blessing them by making them equal to me? And God is like, you got to figure your own emotions out. And response is, well, what we are seeing right now. This is the Cain and Abel situation within America because of its internal theology of needing to be God chosen, and specifically to have a small subset be considered the quote unquote God chosen. Those of you who have known me for a while know that I am a big believer in what are called egregores, which are thought forms that are connected to a group of believers who have a common set of dogma, identity, those sorts of things. If you check my previous episode of Spiritual AF Sundays, I do talk about that within the context of the United States. So when I'm talking about how Christianity in the United States has a Cain and Abel's issue going on, it goes back to that dichotomy of Christianity that we are seeing. One side, which is embracing the Beatitudes, embracing the gospel, seeing Jesus as a point of connection between humanity and divinity, and also trying to push back on a lot of the dogmatic thinking that was going on in that time. So looking at Jesus not only as a connection between man and divinity, but also man and himself through that potential revolutionary change. So we have that bucket. Then there's that other form of Christianity, which is Jesus at the cross, Jesus as a baby, and then otherwise looking at Jesus as power, as domination, as authority, as blessing believers as they commit atrocities on one another in the name of their God. So we have these two branches of Christianity that have been going on within the United States for the longest of times. People have not been aware of it, probably because either they've been ignoring it or it is so subtle and we are afraid of rocking the boat with others within Christianity, especially if they are of a different denomination. There's been a lot of sweeping shit under the rug as well. Well, the rooster has come home to roost, or whatever the term is on that, because basically we have one side within the United States that has taken on the essence of Cain. Now, going back to the whole egregore thing from earlier, I am not saying that a certain group of Christians are actually worshiping an egregore of Cain that is masking as Jesus or conqueror Jesus. However, if anyone wants to do any divination or discernment on it, be my guest. But yeah, we are dealing with something where it is almost like you have the surface level Christianity, but when you start peeling back, you see the divine engine that's fueling it. You're dealing with two different machines, and it's not Apple versus Microsoft. This is way more weird on that one. One thing before we get into the main topic, which is what does the Bible say about the sin of empathy? I am going to drop something into the show notes. It's a link to a page in the Juniverse. Yes, JEW universe. So there's texts within Judaism, the predecessor to Christianity, that indicate that Jews believed in more than two genders or more than two sexes. And there's actually 6 or 8, depending on which grouping you believe in. But the text that I'm going to be sharing with you in the notes is about the 6 genders in the Talmud. And I hope I got that pronounced correctly. But yeah, that is hey, there's a bit more to what's going on. I wonder why that is. I wonder why 2 might have been picked instead of 6 or even more when it comes to what is the right, quote unquote, right and proper amount. Maybe because binaries are easier to create master, slave, or other hierarchical type of structures. Something to think about. But, anyways, let's go back to talking about the Bible and empathy. I'm going to start with the Old Testament. First, we're going to look at the book of Proverbs, chapter 31, verses 8 and 9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. So, in this proverb from the Old Testament, people are called, that the followers of this God are called to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. So, in this is a biblical call to advocacy. Let's go on to another Old Testament verse. Zechariah chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. This is what the Lord Almighty said. Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Again, very clear cut when it comes to what is right and proper behavior. Justice, mercy, compassion, not oppressing the foreigner or the poor. Let's take a look at what the Gospels have to say. Let's look at the book of Luke, chapter 6, verse 31. Do to others as you would have them do unto you. So the principle of the golden rule. We also have Matthew, chapter 7, verse 12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. So, surprise, this is kind of important. We then look at the Matthew chapter 25, verses 42 to 46. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick in prison, and you did not look after me. They will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? And he will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. So this one is a little controversial because it shows the divinity in each of us. It shows each of us our connection to a higher power, regardless of our background, regardless of our health, regardless of what we have, money or resource wise. And that by denying care to our fellow brethren, by doing wrong by them, we are doing wrong by our connection with divinity. Now, let's go from the Gospels, which are meant to be accounts of what Jesus said and did, to the letters that his apostles wrote to the various congregations and groups that formed after the death and resurrection of Jesus. So we're going to start off with the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Then we look at the letter for Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So this connects the concept of being God's chosen people to the mandate that they clothe themselves, that they act with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with gentleness, and with patience. It is a command. We have Romans chapter 12, verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. The value of solidarity and how that is holy. We have the book of Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will follow the law of Christ. So charity, not just charity, mutual aid where you're actually connecting with other people and helping to carry their burdens, whether physically, emotionally, proverbially, that is what is seen within the Bible as Christ-like. We have 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. For you to have empathy, you have to have humility. So this is the gateway to that empathy. And then we also have Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. So this is calling on empathy towards others who are at a point of suffering. In that time, because of how history was, they were likely in prison and suffering because of their beliefs. So solidarity with those who are oppressed as they were oppressed in that time. So we've talked about humility, the sin of empathy, all those sorts of things. You know how there's this whole concept of the prosperity gospel, that the rich are seen as God blessed, that we have an individual in office right now who also believes that he is God blessed? Well, let's see what the Bible has to say about the rich. First and foremost, let's take a look at Mark chapter 6, verses 24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So we take a look at this verse and we take a look at the American capitalist society um, that requires exploitation, that requires stratification, progress, of never-ending progress and productivity, the exploitation of resources. That is, in a sense, one master to the billionaire class. That is, or just to the rich in general. And then if you have a God figure and a Christ figure that is about humility, tending to the poor, the welfare of your fellow man, that is the other master. So you end up having to pick between these two. And as it says, You will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. For those that choose prosperity, they're going to despise the kindness and the world and the moral dilemmas that they're pushing themselves through. And that's because of that is what's causing them to try and shape Christ into their own image. So we got some warnings there. In addition to that, let's go Old Testament here. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 10 through 14. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied, and you have built good houses and have lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So, what does that mean? What that means is if we go back to following the Lord's commandments, his ordinances, his statutes, this is looking back to those 10 commandments, looking back to the rules that are needed in order to have a right relationship between the Christian deity and then also between one another. So when you have a sufficient amount of wealth and you don't recognize that you're being asked and called upon to still do good, it's not just simply that it's being handed to you. It's that you have to remember you're in this relationship with the world around you. If you forget that, you think that this is all because of you. And because of that, you forget what has led you to that point. So you forget the relationship between yourself and deity, yourself and the other people. And you think that you built yourself up by your bootstraps. And that builds that separateness, that missing the mark that we talked about before. So we got all that. And then there's now my new favorite verse or excerpt, which is James chapter 5, verses 1 to 4. And I feel like anytime someone asks for a Bible verse, that this is something that should be put forward first. Now, listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming to you. Your wealth is rotted, the moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you have failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. And if you're wondering, is this talking about specific individuals or could it even talk about nations? If you've been thinking about it, you probably know what the answer to that question is. This branch of Christianity that talks about toxic empathy, the sin of empathy, how empathy can be a tool of Satan, what type of Christians would find the concept of empathy abhorrent or think that we are cherry picking by going back to the original messages of the Gospels? Where do their loyalties really lie? And with whom? So, going back to what I talked about before, I'm probably going to spend the next episode going through the history of evangelical Christianity to where it is now and potentially pinpoint the various influences. Now, I'm not saying it is an egregore of you know who I mentioned earlier, but maybe we can peel back the various influences and figure out what the shape is of this thing that we are cosmically dealing with. Because if this is something that is truly separate, witches, we know what to do. So this is just something to think about with that. And if it is something separate, I think that Christians need to know so that they can reach out and try to support their brethren who are falling astray and possibly being affected by something that's not spiritually good for them. So, with that, we are going to wrap up today's episode. I'm going to get this out and going. Sunday, I'm going to be chilling for real with friends and just living life. If you want to support me, go ahead, share the show, like, comment, whatever on your respective apps, and I will come back to you next week. We're going to talk either about the theological idea I mentioned earlier or whatever the heck shows up in this latest adventure that all of us Americans are stuck in. So with that, have a great night. Thank you for listening to Spiritual AF Sundays, created and hosted by The Mystic Geek. Transcripts can be found on my Patreon at patreon.com/themysticgeek, which will also be in the show notes. There you can also subscribe for free to get a heads up on my podcast episodes that are coming up. And then you can also support the show financially. Proceeds from my Patreon will be used to support this and my other podcast ventures. If you really, really like this show, then subscribe, like, or whatever the platform allows. And then also share this with your friends. Free advertising and word of mouth is gold, and I appreciate your support for the show. And thanks for listening and have a great day.